Okay, Lab Module 3 is all on the animal kingdom. It's pretty long, so I will try to move quickly through it. Make sure that you have your photo file ready so you can take notes on that. And here we go. Once again, we're going to back up and talk a little bit about classification. There are 3 domains of life. We've already talked about bacteria. Archaea we did not discuss in lab per se. And in the domain eukarya, we have done the protistans as well as the fungi and the plants. So now, in many ways, people do better on this because they're a little bit more familiar with the animals. The other thing to think about is a lot of times when we think about animals, we think about things with backbones. We think about cats, dogs, lions, tigers, things like this. But by far the majority of the animal kingdom are invertebrates. So in this animal kingdom, we're going to be talking about 10 different phylums, and they are listed here. They are sort of in an order of primitive to advanced. If you're taking the lecture exam at the same time, you know this is really important to understand a little bit about the evolutionary changes that happen at each level. But in some cases, there's not a specific order, but in general, it's primitive to advanced. Okay. And of course, there are more than 10 phylums, but we've just chosen 10 of the most important to discuss. Okay, so as you go through and look at these pictures, what you're required to learn is that, first of all, they're all in the same domain. They're all going to be eukarya, and I will ask questions about that. They are all in the kingdom Animalia, or animal kingdom. Always the same for this group of pictures. They're all the same. Okay, then you do need to be able to put them into the different phylums. So these words here in parentheses, for example, porifera is more of the scientific name for the phylum sponges. We can just use sponges for this class. That's fine. Flatworms are actually called platyhelminthes. The segmented worms have the name Annelida, and the roundworms are Nematoda. So anyway, but you can use the words that are written here, as well as like over here, cartilaginous fish. More scientifically, that would be chondrichthyes. Chondro means cartilage. Ichthyes means fish. Bony fish, osteo means bone, and ichthyes means fish. Okay, so we've got these 10 phylums, as you can see as we go through down here. And then we're going to go into a little more detail on the last phylum, which is Chordata. Okay, these are the chordates, and it goes along the first, we're going to call it a class. It's not the true class name by any means, but these are the very primitive ones. They are invertebrate chordates. Okay, and I think that's how I have it listed on another page. They're actually invertebrate. Look at that writing. Ooh. Chordates. Okay, that's another way to put it. Okay, because again, they don't actually have a backbone. Okay, so just to repeat, real quickly here, we'll be talking about sponges, the cnidarians, the flatworms, the segmented worms, the roundworms, rotifers, molluscans, arthropods, the echinoderms, and lastly, the chordates. Under the chordates, we're going to group these into the invertebrate chordates, which are a very odd little group. The jawless fish, also very odd. And then we get into ones that I'm sure you're more familiar with. Cartilaginous fish, bony fish, amphibians, reptiles, aves, which are birds, and the mammals. Okay, on this page we have the sponges. These are the most common types of sponges right here. There's also a very strange group of sponges that they call glass sponges, which have silica in them. And of course, the big deal about sponges, they're very, very primitive. They're considered to have very little pattern, very little symmetry. although that looks like the most symmetrical thing I've ever seen in my life, but we're going with the way it's described, and that is no symmetry. So those are the sponges, the examples that we have in this for your lab. The next group is a big group. These are the cnidarians. Cnidarians, it begins with a C. The C is silent. And these include things like jellyfish and corals, Portuguese man-of-war, hydra, things like that. And so on this page, I'll just go through them. You've probably seen this at the beach. It looks like little yellow shoestrings. That is actually a type of coral, okay? Here's another picture of that same type of coral, and I've actually found it still alive on the beach. Usually it's all dried up, but I found some that it is alive. And of course, it is a colony of organisms. It's not a single organism. And here is a picture of some of that, what we call sea whip coral. You don't have to know the name of it for this lab practical. But you can see the little organisms that have come out to feed right here, okay, and when it was put into an aquarium. Okay, so what else do we have here? We have Portuguese man-of-war, which are fairly common on our beaches, and that too is a colony. It's not just one single organism. Here are a couple of different types of corals that are in this group. Here's a type of small jellyfish. This over here in the corner is a sea anemone, and this one right here is a model of a hydra. Notice the hydra has tentacles, the mouth is right here, and what's really interesting about these, and all of these in the cnidarians, is they have specialized stinging cells, shown right here, which are called nematocysts. This image right here, when we do meet face to face, we order little tiny hydra. They're almost microscopic, but if you look really hard, you can see them with the naked eye. And we put them on a glass slide, take a look at them, and you can see their tentacles right here. And if you go to a really high magnification, which you're seeing here, and you put a little drop of vinegar on it, it causes them to shoot out their nematocysts, which are what these structures are right here. Okay? So again, all of these are cnidarians. That's our second phylum. Our third phylum, the flatworms. Okay? And you know, they look a lot like they got ironed. Okay? They're flat. And this is an example over here in a jar of one called a tapeworm. And this is a model of a tapeworm. On this tapeworm, the structures that you need to know, they have their bodies come in this particular species, has little sections which are called proglottids. So this is a proglottid, this is a proglottid, and this is a proglottid. And they all stack up on this organism. You can sort of see it on here. It's very difficult to see, but those are the proglottids. They also have hooks, which help these organisms attach to the digestive system of, for example, various mammals. And these are the hooks right here. Okay, so that is one type of flatworm. This flatworm right here is a parasite. It's called a liver fluke. And that can be a parasite to several different kinds of mammals, including humans. And then these two right here are the same organism. This is a picture of one that was living under a dissecting scope. And this one is a stained slide. But these are called planaria. And they're common in fresh water. They're free living. They are not actually parasites. You can see the little eye spots right here. They're kind of cool because they are, I don't know, they get kind of a little personality, okay? And they, just because they have these little silly eye spots that look like little crossed eyes, they look like little puppies or something. But anyway, those are the planaria. We're moving on to the segmented worms. And the most common one we think about when we talk about segmented worms or the annelids would be the earthworm. This is a fairly high magnification with a dissecting scope of the segments of an earthworm. This area right here is a thickened area which is called the clitellum. And the clitellum is what produces like a type of little cocoon where earthworms are hermaphrodites. In other words, they have both sexes in each organism, but they do have to mate with a second organism. And they swap sperm, and then the eggs come out in a little cocoon produced in that area. This model right here is supposed to be part of an earthworm, and this thickened area right here is also the clitellum. A little bit hard to see on here. You can see the green happens to be the digestive system as it moves on down, but they do have a brain, believe it or not. And on this model, this little yellow structure right there is representative of the brain of the earthworm. Some other common annelids or segmented worms are leeches. This is a jar full of leeches that we have at school. They're also what we call marine tube worms. And you may have found or seen these on the beach. And if you look at them very closely, like in this picture right here, you can see that this tube is actually made up of little tiny shells, little mollusk shells. And what happens is the worm, the segmented worm that lives inside there, builds with sort of a mucus that it produces. It sort of glues together these various little shells, and then it stays in there for most of the time, and then occasionally will come out in order to feed. Down here at the bottom, this also is hard to tell from this photograph, but this is actually a mollusk shell. But what has remained here are a different type of marine tube worm that has produced these little limestone curlicues on here. You can see the openings to them at a different angle here. But those were produced again by marine tube worms, and oftentimes you'll find shells on the beach with little bits of that on it. And so again, these are all in the phylum segmented worms. Okay, this page has two phylums on it. I only have one picture and it's kind of blurry, but these are the roundworms right here. This is my only representative of the roundworm on the photo files, but these are actually heartworms, okay, in a dog's heart, okay. They do get into dogs. I believe they can actually affect cats as well. But that is one example. There are also things that go with these like pinworms. There are other types of roundworms, but these here are heartworms. Okay. Okay, so that right here, again, is our only example of the roundworms, which are also called nematodes. Now, nematodes are often found in the soil as free-living organisms. They're often found in water, in fresh water as well. So they're not all parasitic. Okay, over here on the right side, we have the rotifers. And they're not like they're that big a huge group or anything like that, but they're easy to get for lab study, and so we include them. Okay, they're not like the most, they're not as important as, say, the arthropods or the chordates or something like that, but we're going to throw them in. They're common in fresh water. This right here is a fairly low magnification of a rotifer. Here are a couple more. Right here we have a more highly magnified picture. And one of the things you need to know about the rotifers is right here they have what are called the ciliated corona. And these little structures, sorry, somebody's weed eating out there. I don't know if you can hear that. But these little structures, they have cilia on them, and it looks as though they are spinning, but they are not really spinning. But they move the water around and cause little tiny particles that they will eat and ingest to go into their mouths right there. Okay, the next phylum, the arthropods. Arthropods, huge group, most successful phylum of organisms on Earth. And we have lots and lots of different examples here. This first one is a trilobite. This is actually a fossil form. They no longer live on the Earth. Here you have some insects right here. Here you have a millipede and a centipede. This is a type of crab. Here we have a butterfly. We have a honeybee. Barnacles. These barnacles are actually sitting on top of a mollusk, both of these, and the organisms are no longer in there, okay? But little tiny organisms live in there, and they have the ability to close up these shells when they're in a drier situation. When they're under the water, they open up again, and they're able to feed in that way. But the way these open and close prevents them from drying out. Here's a tarantula. We have harvester ants, another insect. Here's a crawfish right here, a monarch butterfly. Here's another crab. This is a blue crab that's a female. Those are eggs. And here's a cicada. By the way, on this honeybee, that honeybee is carrying pollen right there. Another organism that I probably should have on here, and you may want to look up, is the horseshoe crab. The horseshoe crab is another arthropod that we talk about in lecture, but I see that I don't have it on the file for the arthropods for lab. By the way, arthropods, that means jointed leg, okay? And all of these organisms do have that jointed leg. Let me back up. I will back up. Well, yeah, I will. Okay, our next group are the mollusks. And one of the things that mollusks have is what we call a mantle, which is sort of a slimy covering that goes over parts of their body. We have several different examples here. This is a chitin. This right here is a black velvet slug. You don't have to know the specific names, but that's what it is. You will have to know the specific names for some of these for the next lab practical, but we'll get into that at that time. Okay, so this is a slug. These black velvet slugs are pretty cool. You find they're fairly common around here. You'll see them crossing the sidewalk sometime. These little shells you'll often see on the beach. This is a type of bivalve, which again is a subgroup of this phylum. For lab, all you need to know is that this is another mollusk. Here's another gastropod, which is a snail-like organism right here. And this one right here is the, quote, state shell of Texas. This is the lightning whelk. Sometimes when you're out on the beach, you might find these paper-looking structures. They're kind of odd, and at a lower magnification, you can see that they kind of are coiled up, and they look a little bit like trash. I mean, you might not know what they are. But amazingly, this is the egg case produced by the lightning whelk. And if you find one, sometimes after, normally they would stay underwater, but sometimes they'll wash ashore and you'll find them on the beach. Sometimes the little snails, baby snails, can be alive in there, or sometimes you tear these open and it's full of the little baby shells, which will eventually grow into this, and then eventually that. Another group, which is shown on here a little bit spread out, but this is a squid and this is an octopus. Those two are considered cephalopods, which is another subgroup of the mollusks. What you have to know for lab is that all of these are in the phylum Mollusca. We're moving on to the echinoderms. Echino means spiny, derm, like the dermatologist, means skin. And so one of the most common members of the echinoderms is the starfish. We're not going to learn specific names of them, but here's one. Here's a starfish right here on the beach with some coral. To think back to what we learned earlier today, that coral is a cnidarian, but the starfish is an echinoderm. Some other examples here. These are sea urchins here. Once those spines come off, they look a little bit like that. Sometimes you see them, they're real pretty with little white. They're decorative. Don't ask me why. People do weird things with dead stuff, and I love dead echinoderms. Starfish, sand dollars, sea urchins, okay? Because they leave behind a calcium carbonate skeleton. Okay, this photograph right here is a living starfish, the underside of it, what we call the ventral side, and here you can see the little tube feet. He was in the process of eating a little shell, so his mouth was right underneath here, okay? If we look at the model, we'll go down here and look at the model of pretty much the same thing. These are the tube feet, these gray structures here, and this is where we find the mouth of a starfish. Often what they do is they push their stomach actually out and inside a mollusk. Very often the little tube feet will help open up a clam, something like that. They slip their stomach in, they release digestive juices and then digest it, and then they will pull their stomach back in. Wow. This is the dorsal side, part of it being removed, part of the outer structure is being removed, and very hard to see here, but this right here is the anus. The anus, mind you, of a starfish. Very difficult to see in this picture, but right here there's a structure called a sieve plate. Water goes in through this and goes through the water vascular system into the tube feet. Okay, so that was 9 different phylums. Okay, phyla is sometimes used. Phyla is plural for phylum. Sometimes I say phylums, sometimes I say phyla. But nevertheless, we're moving on to the last phylum, which are the chordates. Chordates are the most advanced, but they do include some very weird things. And the first weird things I've got here are these. This is a lancelet. This is a jar of lancelets. They're fairly small. They stay burrowed in the sand underwater, and feed on things that are in the water. Okay, this model is actually a lancelet model, and one of the reasons that it is used as a model for the chordates is because you can see the 4 characteristics that must be present for a chordate to be put in the chordate group. Okay, so I'm going to go over those. The first 2 are easy. These are gill slits. Okay, you can see there, you can see the nice little slits. This is the anus, so what we've got here is a postanal tail. Okay, those are easy. Okay, the other 2 are a little bit trickier. This green area right here, it's sort of a tube-like structure, columnar in shape. That's going to be what is called the notochord. Okay, and then the dorsal hollow, what is it called? Dorsal hollow nerve tube is this light pink tube. And that is going to become the spinal cord and brain. Okay, the notochord actually will become some of the structures in later on. We've talked about this earlier, but for example, that is a structure that in the human embryo will eventually become the pads between the vertebra, the intervertebral discs. So again, those are the 4 characteristics that you need to be able to identify on this, and you need to know that this model is of a lancelet. It's one of those, this. They're all the same thing. Okay, another common one in this group, and what we're calling it, it's not a true phylum name. We're kind of taking a few liberties with this, but this group, it can be called a couple of different things. They are invertebrate chordates, primitive, the most primitive of all the chordates. They do not have a backbone, but they are chordates. And at least these lancelets look a little bit fish-like. Check out these other things. These are crazy. These are called tunicates or sea squirts is the other name for them. In other parts of the world, they're quite beautiful. They look sort of like a combination of between a mollusk and a sponge or something like that. They just kind of look like a blob here. But their larval stage has the 4 characteristics. Okay, as an adult, those characteristics disappear. Just as with us, we no longer have gill slits, we no longer have a postanal tail. And the other 2 structures develop into something else. But it is important to know that the tunicates or sea squirts here and here are chordates. And these are sea squirts. If you're also taking the lecture, sometimes you get a little repetition here. Sorry about that. But these were growing on they put a sheet of glass, don't ask me why, down in the water on a pier off of a dock, I guess you'd say, by the aquarium. And all these sea squirts attached to it. And we used to go out on the boat with this class. I wish we could. But anyway, and the captain of the boat showed us these. And if you squeeze them, they squirt. That's why they're called sea squirts. Okay, again, chordates. Now we're moving to, we have 2 different levels on this particular page. These on this side, this is the dividing line right here. On this side, we have the jawless fish. Okay, so these are the jawless fish. And they consist of 2 main types that we'll talk about. These here are lamprey. And then, to be perfectly honest, very hard to tell in this picture because you see some horrible stuff in jars, okay? But basically, I'm pretty sure this is the lamprey, this is the hagfish. And you'll learn more about that in lecture, or you already have. But these are considered jawless fish. Once again, we are going in an order that represents primitive to advanced. So the first chordates to evolve were those ones that we saw on the previous page without a backbone. Now we have a backbone, but no jaws. Okay, we're moving to the third group, and these are the cartilaginous fish. Okay, cartilaginous fish is the next section. These also are the first to literally have a jaw. And you think about it, what's the difference? Oh, it's a big deal. It's a big deal because now you have the ability to literally move the mouth structure for feeding. And so it does make a difference. So we have a shark here. We have some black-tip sharks here. This is a jaw of a shark that a long time ago when we were at the beach, my husband caught about a 5-foot shark, and we saved the jaw. Okay, and so that's what this is. This is well, let me back up. These are, this is a southern stingray. I'm mumbling. This is a stingray, probably a southern stingray. You don't have to know that for now, but that's what that is. And very closely related to those are what are called rays. They also cartilaginous. In other words, they do not have literal bone. And these right here are the egg cases of rays. Sometimes sometimes I've been on the beach and I've found dozens of them. Sometimes it goes years and I don't see them at all. And they've always, when I found them, they've always been empty. I've never found one where there's still a developing skate inside, but they kind of feel like plastic. It's really weird stuff. But anyway, so on this page we have the jawless fish on the left side. On the right we have the cartilaginous fish, which also can be called chondrichthyes. That is the class name for those. Okay, we have two groups here as well, and that line would go right here. Okay, on the left-hand side, we have bony fish. Bony fish are what we're pretty comfortable. I mean, we all can recognize a bony fish, although a seahorse is a rather odd one. These are also called osteichthyes, but you can call them bony fish. Okay, so then from there we get a little more advanced, and now we have also the movement to land, and now we have the amphibians. This class, amphibia, amphi means on both sides, meaning water and land. They still have to have an association with water in order to reproduce. So basically, we're talking frogs, toads, and salamanders. Okay? Here's some tadpoles. This is some huge, it is huge. We have it in the lab. It's I'd say it's almost 12 inches tall, or, in this position, but it is a South American toad. Here's a skeleton of a frog. Here's a green tree frog. Here's our the toad that we have around here. Okay, so those are all the amphibians that live on water and land. Now we're moving up one more, a little bit more advanced, and we have the reptiles. We've got turtles and tortoises. Here's the skeleton of a turtle here. Here's a sea turtle. We have snakes. There's a rattlesnake. There's a snake skeleton. We have lizards. There are lots and lots of different kinds of lizards. Here's a green anole. This is what we commonly call a horny toad or horned lizard. And this is a gecko. Okay, these geckos are not actually native to this area, but they were brought here a long time ago. And sometimes you can see them on your screen door or something, that you can almost see through them. Okay, very strange. But again, all of these are in the class Reptilia. Here we have aves. So aves is the class, and these are the birds. When we get to the next exam, the last exam, you'll be learning the names of these, the actual common names of these. For now, what you need to do is look at them and say, class Aves, phylum Chordates, kingdom Animalia, domain Eukarya. Okay, and now we have the class Mammalia, or mammals. And so again, here are some examples here. Bats, coyote, these are javelina. That picture was taken out at in Calallen at that park where they have the hawk watch that I can't think of the name of right now. Here's a raccoon. Here is a armadillo. And of course you might say, oh, don't those, they look like a super raccoon, like Superman or something, but these are actually in a position that is done. They've been stuffed, and this is for what we call a museum mount for study. And so they do look a little bit silly there, but the insides are all gone, and they are stuffed and preserved. Okay, here is our only North American marsupial, which means it has a pouch. And of course that's a possum, or opossum as it actually is. And then down here in the corner, I have the front side and the back side of, yes, a human placenta. Okay, here you can see the side that would be attached to the fetus. Okay, it's cut off right there. On this side is the side that would be attached to the wall of the uterus. Okay, so that's the placenta right there, and this has been preserved, of course, and injected to show arteries and veins and things like that. And no, it's not mine. Okay, just in case you're wondering. Okay, couple more mammals here. I'm looking a little silly, but that was when we went to Roatan a couple of years ago, and this is a three-toed sloth. Okay, they were crazy. They would just hold on to you. It was nuts. Okay, over here on the right, you see a dolphin, a bottlenose dolphin, and that's my son Keith. This was probably 10 years ago, and this friend of his was taking pictures off the pier when he was surfing, and there was this dolphin that just went with him over and over and over. It was crazy. But what's my point? You got a mammal, you got a mammal, you got a mammal, you got a mammal. Okay. Now we have the organs inside a model of a human. This is the last slide, the last page. And while we're talking about mammals, I do want you to know the names of the various organs. And so take your time to look at these. At first you might say, oh, I know what they are. And then comes the test and you think, oh, I thought that liver was a kidney. Things like that. So take the time to look at it. I'm going to start, strangely enough, on the far right, this model right here. And you can see that there are lungs. That's pretty easy. That's the heart. That's the liver. It's the largest organ of the body. Largest internal organ. This is the stomach. This is the small intestine. This is the large intestine. So again, basically what happens is when you swallow your food, it goes down into your stomach. Eventually it goes through the small intestine, and then after that it goes into the large intestine and out. Okay? And the by small and large, what we're really referring to is the diameter of the structure, not the length, because the small intestine is much, much longer. Okay, if we look over here at this model, we have lungs here, we have the heart here. This structure right here is muscular, and that is the diaphragm. You can also see the diaphragm right there. And this is the muscle that separates the thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity. Okay, so that's the diaphragm. And if the liver is removed, the stomach and the intestines, what you can see here is the kidneys. And then here, tucked under the left side of the diaphragm, is the spleen. Okay? Over here, here's the spleen again, and this structure right here is the pancreas. Pancreas is very important in a couple of different ways. Not only does it produce enzymes such as hormones such as insulin that control the uptake of sugar, but also produces digestive enzymes which are secreted into the small intestine. So that's the pancreas. This right here is the liver, which has been taken out and turned over so you can see it. And this green structure is the gallbladder. The gallbladder is important for storing bile, which helps emulsify fats in our diet. And so the bile is actually produced in the liver, but then it is stored in the gallbladder. And sometimes people get gallstones, things like that, which sometimes they have to have their gallbladder removed, and then they have to watch their diet a little bit, even though they're still producing bile for digestion of fats or for emulsification of fats. Sometimes they do have to sort of limit the fats that they intake. What else can I tell you? Oh, here's the bottom of the large intestine right there as it's going out. Okay, the rest of it's been all removed. So anyway, this concludes this section. I know this was a long one, but take your time, stop it, start it, do what you have to know all of these parts and all of these different organisms. Get it straight in your head, get them classified into groups, play with them in stacks so that you know what's what, and you'll be ready for the exam.